It's my honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Joe LeConte. He is a New York Times best-selling author, educator and filmmaker, director of the Rivendell Center in New York City. Some of you, we're older, a lot of us, right? I don't know if you know what Rivendell is, but if you don't, your kids do, your grandkids do. He hosts the YouTube channel History in the Human Story. He also serves as a presidential scholar at the New College of Florida and as the C.S. Lewis Scholar for Public Life at Grove City College. How would you like to be a C.S. Lewis Scholar in anything, right? Isn't that a great title? He's the author of several books, including the New York Times bestseller, A Hobbit, A Wardrobe, and a Great War, How J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis Rediscovered Faith, Friendship, and Heroism in the Cataclysm of 1914 to 1918. And what happened? What was the Cataclysm of 1914 to 1918? World War I. He has also written God, Locke, and Liberty, right? So Life, Liberty, Pursuit of Happiness, Life, Liberty, and Property. That's John Locke's inspiration on the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson. God, Locke, and Liberty, The Struggle for Religious Freedom in the West. His most recent book is The War for Middle-earth, and a number of people actually have that here with them today. They brought it in to get signed, and we're selling these as well outside. Really good price, too. Some of them for $10, some of them for $20. So The War for Middle-earth, Tolkien and Lewis confront the gathering storm, 1933 to 45. So that's obviously the sequel to the cataclysm of the First World War, the even worse one in World War II. So that's HarperCollins 2025, just came out. His commentary has appeared in scholarly and popular journals, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, National Affairs, The New Criterion. NPR has been on National Public Radio many times. I don't know why they let, well actually today, I'll tell you why they let him in, because he's a nice guy, as you'll see here today. Even NPR likes Joe LeConte. National Geographic, National Review. He is a native of Brooklyn, New York. Divides his time driving between Washington, D.C. and New York City. So that's his kind of formal bio, and a lot of that's in the program. I thought I would say a few personal things. He's a great personality, winsome, energetic, just an absolute dynamo. A good friend of myself and of Grove City College. Our students love him. We had him on campus in residence a couple of years ago, and he taught some classes. They adored him. In fact, when he left, they did this send-off for him that just surely had him crying. It was just so sweet and nice. They've never done that for me, Joe. Any of them. Just they adored him. They said, "How can we bring him back? How can we bring him back? How can we bring him back?" He'll actually be back on campus in April for our conference on the 250th anniversary of America. So he'll be back again. He's been writing articles forever, doing radio forever, TV, podcasts, books, and now he's making a lot of films. And they range from The Founders to Western Civ to a great series on Italy that you've got to see online. As you'll see, he's very Italian, all right, very Italian. I am too, but you wouldn't know it from my last name. I've got my dad's Polish last name. Ken Gore is Polish, but my mom's 100% Italian, so we talk Italian stuff a lot. We even talked at one point about, he and I both share a really blessed thing in common. We hate flying, right? And so he took the train here today. I flew to Arizona last week. I probably would have preferred to take the train all the way to Arizona. We've actually talked about doing a cruise to Italy across the Atlantic where we do a lecture series on all of this stuff. It'd be fun, wouldn't it? Right? Maybe we should do that sometime. Yeah, exactly. Andiamo. Let's go, right? Let's do it. Anyone want to sign up? All right. Pronto, subito. Let's do it. So he's, in addition to being very Italian, kind of Mr. Italy in a way, he's Mr. Western Civ, right? He's all about Western Civ. As Jesse Jackson, the late Jesse Jackson just passed away, right? Jesse Jackson once said, "Hey, ho, ho, Western Civ has got to go." That's not what Joe LeConte believes, right? He would be, "Hey, ho, ho, Western Civ has got to stay." And he's done, following up, I think, very cleverly on Eric Metaxas's idea, another friend of Grove City College, on Socrates in the City. He's done a series on Cicero in the city. And indeed, Cicero is the man, right? Cicero is the guy. All about Western Civ, all about Italy, and also all about the founders, the American founding fathers. He's done so many, John Locke, others, and now he's going to do Benjamin Rush, which we've wanted to do, as those of you know who have been coming to this for years, this series, the Foundation of American Leadership series, started as what? The American Founders Lecture Series, which we did for a long time. And the one founder who we never did was Benjamin Rush, because it's hard to find anybody who talks about Benjamin Rush or even knows who he is. But as Joe said, as we say in our promotion for this, and not to steal his thunder, this could be the first line of his talk, but his talk is called Benjamin Rush, the American Revolution's Indispensable Doctor. Think about this. A signer of the Declaration of Independence, I said appendix, I'm thinking doctor already. Chief surgeon in Washington's Continental Army, where he probably removed an appendix or two. Pioneer in psychiatry, fervent abolitionist, and a man of faith. He's one of these founders, as so many of them were, Benjamin Franklin, his final gig was head of the Pennsylvania Society for the Abolition of Slavery. And Joe says, no American founder more fully embodied the political and religious ideas of the Declaration of the Constitution. Think about that. People might think that would be John Adams, right? Or somebody like Adams. No, Benjamin Rush. Come and learn about this is so well said, about the most important revolutionary leader that many Americans have never heard of. When I was pre-med at Pitt and I was thinking about changing my major and started taking poli-sci courses, I love Benjamin Rush because I can identify with him as that doctor of the revolution. I think he was the only MD of the group, probably. So he has a film that goes with it. He'll show a clip of that, sometime during his talk or after his talk. So I've said enough. Here he is, Dr. Joe LeConte, on Dr. Benjamin Rush.
Well, thank you, Paul. Can you hear me back there in the bleacher seats okay? Everybody good? Oh, terrific. You mentioned Jesse Jackson and that line about Jackson and Western Civ. I think actually just before I left Grove City, there was a group of students outside the classroom door saying, hey, hey, ho, ho, Professor LeConte's got to go. No, just kidding. No, there is no, young people like to say, I've got a lot of side hustles, a lot of different things I got my hands in, different organizations. There is no organization I am more proud of being a part of than Grove City College. And yeah, that's right. And the leadership that Paul Kenger and his magnificent team have shown here in so many ways at this institution. So glad to be a part of this institution, guys. What I'm going to do, I'm going to talk not that long, 15, 20 minutes, and then I'm going to show you, this is going to be episode 3 of a 4-part episode. The whole thing is an hour long. This will be about 13, 14 minutes, this episode. And then we'll go Q&A right after that. So let me set up Benjamin Rush for you, and then we'll go to the videotape, all right? Let's get into it. I think one of the questions we should be asking as we reflect on the significance of the American experiment is this. Why did the American Revolution of 1776 succeed while the French Revolution of 1789 failed? Put it another way. How did the Americans manage to produce a stable democratic republic while the French produced the guillotine, the reign of terror, and a military dictatorship? The answer can be found in the life and career of Benjamin Rush, the American Revolution's indispensable doctor, as Paul just told us, but it's worth saying again, signer of the Declaration of Independence, surgeon in Washington's Continental Army, a player in the Constitutional Convention, a pioneer in the field of psychiatry, a fervent abolitionist, and a man of faith. In fact, Benjamin Rush, for him, faith and freedom were bound at the hip. Listen to Benjamin Rush. The plant of liberty is of so tender a nature that it cannot thrive long in the neighborhood of slavery, he warned. Remember, the eyes of all Europe are fixed upon you to preserve an asylum for freedom in this country after the last pillars of it are fallen in every other quarter of the globe. That's a statement he made to the American people before the Revolution. It is hard to think of a colonial leader who more fully embodied the political and religious ideals of the Declaration and the Constitution. I knew we had to make a film about Dr. Rush because I suspected that filmmakers such as Ken Burns, despite good intentions, despite very large budgets, despite 12 hours of commentary, I suspected they would not get the basic story right. Benjamin Rush embodies this basic story, the alliance, friends, the alliance between democratic ideals and biblical religion. The doctor read his John Locke right alongside his Bible. And this combination of reason and revelation made possible the American Revolution. That's another topic for another day. We'll get to that next month, actually, at Grove City. Reason, revelation, and the revolution. Let me touch on several areas of Rush's political and civic life, briefly, that made him such an extraordinary leader during the crisis years of the Revolution and the early days of the Republic. So, one day in 1775, Benjamin Rush is part of the inner circle of the colonial opposition to the crown by now. He walks into Jonathan Aiken's bookstore in Philadelphia. It's a meeting place for colonial leaders and activists. He's introduced to a down-on-his-luck British expatriate hired by Aiken as an editor for his new magazine. Rush himself has been working on a document arguing the case for American independence, just scribbling away, making a case for American independence. But he's not sure he should publish it, given the risks involved, because Philadelphia is his home. He's a native Philadelphian. It's the place of his profession. The city is still very divided over the question of independence in 1775. Well, impressed by this British national, Rush suggests that he should take up the task of making a great argument for independence. The man agrees. His name is Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine. Over the next few months, Paine produces a revolutionary pamphlet that is so explosive, so persuasive, that it is widely credited with turning the tide of public opinion in the colonies. The 47-page pamphlet is called Common Sense. I knew I had an educated crowd over here. And it quickly becomes the most popular political tract ever published in America. Paine is the author, yes, but Benjamin Rush is kind of his muse, because Paine reads every chapter to the doctor as he composes it, and it's Benjamin Rush who gives the work its now famous title. The cause of America, Paine writes, is in a great measure the cause of all mankind. Well, that message runs like a shock of electricity to the colonies. This is how Benjamin Rush describes the impact of that tract, of Thomas Paine's tract. Its effects were sudden and extensive upon the American mind. It was read by public men, repeated in clubs, spouted in schools, and in one instance delivered from the pulpit instead of a sermon by a clergyman in Connecticut. This thing's taken off like wildfire, right? One historian estimates that 500,000 copies were published in 1776. 500,000 out of the gate, flying off the shelves. Historian Bernard Bailyn calls it the most brilliant pamphlet written during the American Revolution. Without Benjamin Rush, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think it would have happened. Let's take the issue of slavery in the colonies. Slavery. Listen to Benjamin Rush on this. So much hath been said upon the subject of slave keeping that an apology may be required for this paper, wrote the Philadelphia physician on the eve of the Revolution. The only one I shall offer is the evil still continues. And what followed now in this document, authored by Benjamin Rush, it's got to be the most withering assault on slavery ever published in the American colonies. It's called Address to the Inhabitants of the British Colonies Upon Slave Keeping, published 1773, strikes a chord. First 1,200 copies sell out immediately. Appealing to conscience and common sense, Rush demolishes the rationalizations for slavery then in vogue, beginning with the assumption that Africans were a naturally inferior race to white Europeans. He cites evidence of their ingenuity, he says, and humanity as proof that they are equal to the Europeans. Equal to the Europeans. Not many people are talking this way in the 1770s. He refutes to claim that slavery was approved in the Bible. Here's what Benjamin Rush wrote in his tract against slavery. Christ commands us to look upon all mankind, even our enemies, as our neighbors and brethren, and in all things to do unto them whatever we would wish they should do unto us. Like the religious reformers of the previous century, Rush insists that the golden rule, right, friends? We're talking about the golden rule, what Benjamin Rush called the law of equity. That was like the earlier original meaning of equity, equal justice under the law. He says it should be applied to political life, regardless of race or creed. Now think about it. He's a young physician in the 1770s, young doctor, trying to make his way in Philadelphia, trying to establish himself in the Philadelphia social establishment. This is a gutsy move. It's a gutsy move. A quarter of all the households in Philadelphia have slaves. Some of these slave owners, including Benjamin Franklin, John Dickinson, they are significant people in Benjamin Rush's professional life. Listen to the biographer Stephen Freed on this. Rush became something of a celebrity in the abolitionist world and something of a pariah in the doctoring world. It's costing him. It's costing him. But it doesn't matter. Rush calls for an end to the slave trade and the gradual abolition of slavery in the colonies. Young Negro slaves, he says, should be educated in the principles of virtue and religion. Let them be taught to read and write and afterwards instructed in some business whereby they may be able to maintain themselves. Let laws be made to limit the time of their servitude and entitle them to all the privileges of freeborn British subjects. Let's not miss the point. Nearly a century before Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, a leader in the American Revolution gives voice to the most radical vision of human equality on the world stage. Not bad. Well, the slavery question will be put aside in the struggle for independence. But Rush's prominence in the anti-slavery movement is not going to be without effect, as we'll see in a moment. Consider the doctor's role now in the struggle for independence. May 4, 1776, George Washington stops by the home of Benjamin Rush for lunch. They have apparently a meal of cold ham and salad. What are you guys eating over there? I haven't had any lunch yet. What do you? They've surely discussed the general's plans for confronting the Hessian troops here in 1776. Washington shares his military strategy with Congress later in the week. Thomas Jefferson is in town. And of course, Jefferson gets the task by Congress of drafting a formal Declaration of Independence. This is May, June 1776. Each of the colonies, this is good to remember, each of the colonies now, they're drawing up their own declarations of independence. Each of the colonies. Well, Benjamin Rush must have impressed his Pennsylvania colleagues because they charge him with writing the state's Declaration of Independence. So, Sunday evening, June 23rd, 1776, Rush sits down at a table in his parlor and he starts writing. He works through much of the night, periodically stepping outside onto his balcony overlooking the river. And here's what he wrote. We call upon the nations of Europe and appeal to the great arbiter and governor of the empires of the world to witness for us that this declaration did not originate in ambition or in an impatience of lawful authority, that we were driven to it in obedience to the first principles of nature and by the oppressions and cruelties of the king and parliament of Great Britain. Well, Rush delivers the document to the delegates the next day. It is enthusiastically adopted by Pennsylvania, and immediately 4,500 new soldiers are added to the state militia. All of the colonies are preparing for war. 5 days later, Jefferson shares his document, of course, with Congress. July 1st, 1776, the Continental Congress submits the question to a debate. Should it ratify the Declaration of Independence, formally severing the colonies from Great Britain? 3 days later, July 4th, 1776, the Declaration is approved. But it still has to be signed by the delegates. And a new name now is added to the Pennsylvania slate, Dr. Benjamin Rush. He is formally voted into the Continental Congress at the age of 30. Oh, to be 30 again. At the age of 30. Rush is one of the youngest of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The American Revolution will be the first in history, ladies and gentlemen, based on the concept of natural rights, universal human rights that come from the hand of God. And Benjamin Rush is at the heart of that declaration. Well, for Rush, as for most of the founders, these concepts, they're rooted in the teachings of the Bible. Listen to Rush on this. For this divine book, above all others, referring to the Bible, favors the equality, that equality among mankind, that respect for just laws, and all those sober and frugal virtues which constitute the soul of republicanism. The soul of republicanism. For Benjamin Rush, belief in a just and loving God, I think it's the anchor of his emotional life, his intellectual life. It's the basis of his arguments against slavery. It's the foundation for his entire approach as a physician in the care of his patients. And this belief, though, is going to face an ultimate test beginning in August of 1793, when an outbreak of yellow fever begins to ravage the city of Philadelphia. Any Philadelphians out there remember this, know about this? Okay, that's all right. Well, we wouldn't remember it, but you might know about it. All right. Carried by infected mosquitoes, it's horrifying. It's a horrifying and deadly virus with no known cure. Benjamin Rush sends his wife Julia and children out of the city for their protection. But he's making house calls now, friends, beginning at dawn. Nobody seems to agree about the best treatment, but everybody knows the symptoms. A yellowing of the skin, black vomit, and then certain death. Benjamin Rush and a handful of his assistants, they remain at their posts. They remain at their posts. Think about it. If you were a person of means in Philadelphia, when this outbreak started, you got out of the city. They stay at their post. Benjamin Rush treats everyone who calls on him and even brings the sick into his own home. The daily death toll is terrifying, and no one is spared, neither children nor adults. Rush is working nonstop, emotionally exhausted, physically depleted. He writes about it in his journal. Here's what he said. My short and imperfect sleep was disturbed by distressing or frightful dreams. The scenes of them were derived from sick rooms and graveyards. I concealed my sorrow as much as possible from my patients, but when alone, he says, the prospect of what was before me often filled my soul with the most poignant anguish. I wept frequently when retired from the public eye. Well, Rush becomes seriously ill. He believes he's going to die, but he manages to recover, and he gives the credit to the God of mercy. Here's what he wrote in his journal. Wherewith shall I come before the great Father and Redeemer of men, and what shall I render unto him for the issue of my life from the grave? Here, he says, here all language fails. Friends, there was hardly a major social or political issue that failed to get the attention of Benjamin Rush. He laid the foundation for clinical psychiatry. He pushed for criminal justice reform. And when it came to education, Rush believed, as did all of the founders, that without citizen school in the principles of self-government, the kind of work you're doing here at Grove City, at the Kenger's Institute over here, school to the principles of self-government, any hope of sustaining freedom in this new republic was a fool's errand. He not only educated for a universal public school system open to everybody, he strenuously argued for women's education, raised money for the Young Ladies Academy of Philadelphia, as Rush explained in a public lecture at that academy. Here's what he said. The elevation of the female mind is considered by some men as unfriendly to the domestic character of a woman. But this is the prejudice of little minds, he says, and springs from the same spirit which opposes the general diffusion of knowledge among the citizens of our republic. Not allowing women to be educated springs from the prejudice of little minds. Ladies, can I get an amen? Thank you, ladies. Thank you. Got the amen corner right over there. Great. It is hard to think of a colonial leader who worked harder to put into practice the political and religious ideals of the Declaration and the Constitution. What do we have with Benjamin Rush? Here is a patriot who fights for a government dedicated to protecting the rights and freedoms of all of its citizens. Here is a man of science who puts a supreme emphasis on the life of the mind and the search for truth. Here is a physician with extraordinary courage who refuses to abandon his friends and neighbors to escape a deadly plague. Here is an educator, founder of the Sunday school movement in America, a leader of the American Bible Society. And here is an abolitionist who regards slavery as the enemy of the American Revolution and as an abomination in the sight of God. In all of this, Rush's legacy offers a rebuke, friends. A rebuke, I think, to the progressive left and also to some on the hard right with their degraded and cynical views of the American project. And I'm going to name a few names here, and I hope you'll be all right with that. Modern liberals view the American experiment as a fundamentally racist project. They see religion as the enemy of human freedom and human progress. But there are some on the hard right who regard the founders' belief in natural rights, in individual rights and freedoms, as kind of the serpent in the garden. They claim the American experiment in self-government was doomed from the start, a one-way ticket to expressive individualism, materialism, moral relativism. Notre Dame political scientist Patrick Deneen accuses the founders of a false anthropology that exalts the unleashed ambition of individuals. Yoram Hazony, author of The Virtue of Nationalism, blames the founders for delivering a closed system of secular values that dissolve our fundamental obligations to family and country. Listen to Professor Hazony. There is nothing in the liberal system, meaning the American Lockean system, nothing in that system that requires you or even encourages you to adopt a commitment to God, the Bible, family, or nation. Friends, I think these arguments coming from the right and also from the left, I think they're as ignorant of the American founding as they can possibly be. Listen to Benjamin Rush. A Christian cannot fail of being useful to the Republic, for his religion teaches him that no man lives to himself. Next to the duty which young men owe to their Creator, he says, I wish to see a regard for their country inculcated upon them. The doctor put into practice the principles that he extolled. One last story, and we'll get to our video. At a banquet for the Free African Society in Philadelphia, Rush participates in what must rank as one of the most extraordinary acts of racial reconciliation in the early years of the American Republic. He recorded the event in his journal. August 22nd, 1793. Here's what Rush wrote. Attended a dinner to celebrate the raising of the roof of the African church. About 100 white persons, chiefly carpenters, dined at the table, who were waited upon by the Africans. Afterward, about 50 black people sat down at the same table, who were waited on by the white people. Never did I see people more happy, he says. Some shed tears of joy. Rush offers a toast. May African churches everywhere soon succeed African bondage. Everyone bursts into cheers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens when people understand and embrace the principles of the Declaration and the Constitution. This is the kind of society that emerges organically from these ideas. So please, I'm addressing people outside this room now, let's stop giving a platform to the academic demagogues who demean the achievements of the founding generation. In the life and career of Benjamin Rush, we see the roots of American exceptionalism, friends. Reason, revelation, and revolution. 30 years after the Revolution, Benjamin Rush got into an exchange with John Adams over the future of the American Republic. Adams now writes to him, 1805. Adams is anxious, 30 years after the Revolution got going. Adams, is the present state of the nation Republican enough, small r? Is virtue the principle of our government? Is honor? Or is ambition and avarice, the thirst for riches, the spirit of party and faction, is this the motive and the principle that governs, he asked. These are serious and dangerous questions, he says, but serious men ought not to flinch from dangerous questions. Well, Benjamin Rush, in his public life, in his private life, he never does. He doesn't choose a life of selfish isolationism, of limited liabilities. He doesn't first think, how is this problem, this danger, this difficulty going to affect me? He thinks instead, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? Think about this, Rush, the statement that he made. The American war is over, meaning the war for independence. But this is far from being the case with the American Revolution. On the contrary, nothing but the first act of the great drama is closed. Americans, think about this, Americans won their freedom in the War of Independence. They ordered their freedom during the Constitutional Convention, 1787. But sustaining freedom over the long haul, friends, this is another matter, isn't it? This is the hardest work of all. It's the work of citizenship. 250 years later, we are still in the first act of the great drama. And no matter what our station in life may be, we are all part of this American story, friends. And the outcome of this story, it is in our hands. So, ladies and gentlemen, what will it be? What will it be? What part will we play in this contest between tyranny and freedom, between servitude and citizenship, between the politics of rage and the spirit of gratitude? The future of the Republic depends on how we answer that question. Thank you for listening. Okay, this is episode 3, Benjamin Rush in the thick of the fight. Take it, man. George Washington's Continental Army is about to hurl itself into the largest and one of the most important battles in the Revolutionary War. The British, led by General Howe and Lord Cornwallis, they're planning to seize the rebel capital of Philadelphia. George Washington is determined to stop them. The full force of both armies, totaling 30,000 soldiers, meet for the first time, face to face. The first shots are fired at 6 a.m. along the Brandywine River west of Philadelphia. Dr. Benjamin Rush, chief surgeon in Washington's army, soon finds himself caught up in the fighting. Rush has set up a makeshift hospital at the Birmingham Meeting House, safely behind the American lines. Wounded soldiers begin arriving soon after the battle begins. As the battle rages on, the doctor finds himself soaked in blood from the surgeries and the amputations. And then the fight takes a fearsome turn. 8,000 British and Hessian troops with artillery are approaching from the north. 4,000 American troops from the south. As the roar of the guns grows louder, Rush realizes that his hospital now is almost exactly in the center of the battlefield. But Rush and his team remain at their post, yes, and they keep working. I'm Joseph LeConte, an author and historian, and I'm tracing the steps of the American Revolution's indispensable doctor. We're starting yet another full filming day with this crew. There are no slackers among us, present company accepted. I don't have a wardrobe attendant, as you can see. If there's a single principle that guides the life and the career of Dr. Benjamin Rush and his contribution to the American story, it's this: the Golden Rule. Rush applies the moral logic of this rule: treat others as you want to be treated, to every arena he enters, not just in the field of medicine, but also in politics, education, criminal justice, and the debates over slavery. Like any other mortal, Rush often failed to live up to his own principles. He could slip into self-righteousness and self-pity. But perhaps more fully and more consistently than any other American founder, Benjamin Rush embodied the political and religious ideals of the Revolution. If we're looking for a model of courage, integrity, and high moral purpose that is both realistic and inspiring, we have one. We got some Minutemen over here. Let's see. Attack at Germantown, 1777. I really want to understand, what was it like to serve as a surgeon in the Continental Army.
I lived near Brandywine Battlefield for almost 20 years.
Oh, wow.
It probably took me 11 years of driving around it before I really felt like I understood the geography, because General Howe divides the British force, and one force as a diversion, marches to what's now Chad's Ford. He does an enormous flanking motion to come around, surprises Washington Army. They have to divide their forces, and that's why Rush, can be on a spot where you think I'm safely ensconced, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in the middle of the action. Understanding, 18th century weapons. If you are hit by a projectile, low velocity, but probably 69 to 75 caliber, when that lead hits your body, it's going to open up, it's going to spread out, it's going to create, enormous shock and trauma. Now, they have no understanding of the causes, for instance, of infection at the time.
Even knowing how to treat it.
Yeah, you don't know how to treat something like this.
So you are just thinking on your feet constantly as a physician, trying to figure out what to do, how to keep this guy alive, right?
Absolutely. The armies did not disengage until darkness fell that night, September 11th, 1777.
So it is nonstop, hour by hour, without a break, without a rest.
They actually tore the doors off of the meeting house to use them as operating tables, and we're bringing soldiers from both sides in.
As the British advance, Rush and his colleagues are forced to gather the wounded, drag them to safety. Rush himself barely avoids being captured. Washington's army is compelled to retreat. In a brutal attack at night, many of his men are cut down in hand-to-hand combat in what is known as the Paoli Massacre. The British enter Philadelphia unchallenged on September 26, 1777, where they will remain until the spring of 1778.
This is such a depressing and solemn day. Congress has fled, and the capital of the American Revolution has now fallen. On the other hand, there were people living in Philadelphia. You read their diaries, they saw that as the restoration of order. They were not unhappy to see British redcoats marching into Philadelphia. So it's a great reminder that this is a civil war. It is not just America fighting Britain, it is a civil conflict. There are a number of times in the Revolutionary War where it seemed like maybe the game was up, and this was certainly one of those moments.
Moving from military hospital to military hospital to treat the wounded, Rush is appalled by what he sees among the doctors, the staff, and the soldiers: incompetence, drunkenness, and disorganization. "My dear friend," he writes to John Adams, "we are on the brink of ruin. We lost a city by that want of discipline and system which pervades every part of the army." It was a damning assessment, especially coming from a man who had been with Washington and his troops at the Delaware River, Christmas night, 1776, as they overwhelmed the Hessian troops. He was there at the triumphant Battle of Trenton, treating the wounded, delivering messages for General Washington to his gutsy commanders in the field. Yet at this moment, the skies look terribly dark to Benjamin Rush. But it's always darkest just before the dawn. Washington and his troops find safe haven at Valley Forge, sets up his headquarters right here. And this is where he begins to transform his ragtag recruits into a truly credible and effective fighting force. And Dr. Benjamin Rush deserves some of the credit. Just before becoming a surgeon in the Continental Army, Rush drafted a medical manifesto addressed to soldiers and officers to improve the health of the military. Its opening lines will serve as a warning to soldiers and politicians in every American war to come. Fatal experience has taught the people of America the truth that a greater proportion of men perish with sickness in all armies than fall by the sword. Rush offers practical advice for the soldiers. Eat more vegetables, drink less alcohol, change your clothes, wash your hands and faces every day, get a bath several times a week, keep the area around your tent free of filth, and cut your hair short. This is radical stuff for 1777. At Valley Forge, Rush is appalled by what he sees here in this dirty and stinking camp filled with hungry and ill-clothed men. In the military hospitals, he sees problems of overcrowding, sanitation, shortages of medicine, healthy food, and hospital gowns. In a letter to Patrick Henry, he complains that more soldiers die in a month in the hospitals than perished in the field during the whole of the last campaign. Washington will put in place many of the reforms recommended by Rush, and we can only guess at the number of soldiers who will live to fight another day as a result. Hi, how are you today? I'm very good. My first visit. What don't most people know or appreciate about, life here during that winter of 1777?
We talk a lot about Washington, his aides de camp. Washington did this, Washington did that.
Yes.
He can't do everything by himself. He needs a lot of help. Valley Forge puts a spotlight on the sacrifice and the struggle that it takes to run an army.
All the various people who have to play a vital role.
Absolutely, yeah. So Martha Washington has to play a vital role here, having just come from Mount Vernon to run the household.
She's doing that here.
She's doing that
Wow.
here. The essential theme
Yeah.
with Valley Forge is you're making do with what you have.
Yeah. So just the will to carry on because the cause was good, the cause was just, the stakes were high. You can't help but be convinced these men really believe deeply in the concepts of human freedom and human equality. You didn't join the military for fun and adventure. You felt like the future of your nation was at stake.
I think one of the most exciting areas that historians have uncovered in the last generation or so is much more detail about the service of men of African descent in the Continental Army and more broadly the American forces of the Revolutionary War. It's now thought that about 8,000 men of African descent served in the Continental Army through the course of the war, and that may be even undercounting.
It's like they saw the promise of America. They were inspired by these incredible ideals and vision for human equality, human freedom. And so they're willing to put their lives at stake for that promise, for that vision, knowing, coming back from the war, it could be the status quo.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. That's pretty impressive. Okay, we're getting soaked in sweat. Hang on. So I'm just standing and fist in the air, fist pump. Where do you want me standing? To the surprise of much of the world, the Americans prevail against the British juggernaut in their war for independence. The scrappy Americans defeat the most powerful military of the most powerful colonial empire in the world. That's a little bit like Rocky Balboa from the mean streets of Philadelphia, taking on the world heavyweight champion, Apollo Creed, and beating him. The Treaty of Paris is signed on September 3rd, 1783. And the United States begins its journey as a free and independent state. On the same day as the peace agreement, Rush joins the staff of America's first hospital, the Pennsylvania Hospital, here in Philadelphia, established by Benjamin Franklin about 20 years earlier. When Rush makes his rounds entering the wards to check on his patients, he's trailed by about 20 people. Students and young doctors who watch in reverent silence. In a final lecture to his medical students, Rush unpacked his philosophy of caregiving. Let me advise you, in your visits to the sick, never to appear in a hurry, nor to talk of indifferent matters before you've made the necessary inquiries into the symptoms of your patient's disease. Preserve upon all occasions, he says, a composed and cheerful countenance in the room of your patients. With all due respect to all the wonderful doctors out there, has the medical profession learned anything in the last 250 years? I mean, angels of mercy, protect us.
Doctor, may I have an okay on this, please?
I'm too busy right now. I'll tell you what, I'll put the O on now and come back later for the K.
Rush is an innovator. He's convinced that the emotional outlook of his patients could make an immense difference in their recovery. As he put it, the extent of the influence of the will over the human body has not yet been fully ascertained. Let us avail ourselves of the aid which these powers of the mind present to us in the strife between life and death. Who wouldn't want to have Benjamin Rush as their primary care physician? And we got this tract, Observations on the Duties of a Physician and the Methods of Improving Medicine.
A doctor today should read this to understand some of the bedside manner that they should have. But then there's the other side, which you probably know. Rush held on to a theory of illness. The best way to treat an illness was through bloodletting.
Bloodletting, right.
And the more severe the illness, the more blood that had to be drawn. And there were medical ideas that were saying this is actually not helpful, it's actually harmful, that had developed alongside Rush, and he did not adjust his own thinking on it.
Yeah,
and
he dug in on that, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there was these kind of cultural assumptions that were baked into the cake, and nobody fully escapes all the assumptions of their age. This hospital, the Pennsylvania hospital, first hospital in the country, it will become a major part of Rush's career. We also learned that when Rush comes for the first time and he sees the mentally ill chained in the basement, in cells, it just creates a kind of righteous anger. And he, on the spot, decides something has to change. We have to offer more humane treatment. Partly as a result, he'll be known as the father of psychiatry. Rush advances a revolutionary idea for his medical staff. Depression or melancholia is, as he puts it, a disease of the body as well as the mind. There could be physical, even hereditary causes for mental illness. The physician's task is to treat these people with understanding and compassion, get rid of the chains, and upgrade their living conditions. Thanks to Dr. Rush, the Pennsylvania hospital becomes a pioneer in the humane treatment of the mentally ill. In the years immediately after the Revolutionary War, Rush is quite content to withdraw from political life. He wants to devote his time to his growing family and to improving the state of medicine in Philadelphia and beyond. But it will not be long before another crisis draws him back in. The city of Philadelphia will play host to a national debate about the future government of the United States. Will the country continue as a free and independent nation, or will it descend into factions, chaos, and civil war? Well, these are uncharted waters. America is headed into a political storm more fearsome than anything on the battlefield. And Benjamin Rush will find himself at the center of it. Well, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel so you don't miss more episodes of the Benjamin Rush series. He was a truly remarkable colonial leader. And by the way, this series would be impossible without the generous support from my friends at Founding Forward. So have a quick look and learn about the incredibly important work they're doing to renew the American story. If there's one thing that everybody agrees on, it's this. We have to do a better job of teaching the next generation of Americans the meaning of the words, "we the people." That's the mission of Founding Forward, to educate students, teachers, and the community about the principles of the Declaration and the Constitution, to create a future rooted in liberty. They use the places where history happened, at Valley Forge and in Philadelphia, to make the lessons and the achievements of the American story come alive.
One thing that I love about learning history and where it happened is that you get a sense of feeling and passion.
The experts that they bring in, the different perspectives of the topic really help you understand it much more deeply.
These immersive programs transform people's lives and create the citizen leaders of tomorrow. As the nonprofit charity of the Union League of Philadelphia, Founding Forward reaches thousands each year, and they have aggressive goals for growth. But this work is only possible because of the generosity of supporters like you, who are helping to renew the founders' vision of a nation dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, a nation always striving to become a more perfect union. That was part 3 of a 4-part series. You can find all 4 parts on my YouTube channel, YouTube at Joe Loconte. Here's the fun stuff. We were invited actually last week to be part of a White House conference, arts and culture conference with different filmmakers, creatives who are celebrating America's 250th. So my film team and I, we were there at the White House talking about Benjamin Rush, which was great fun. We're going to turn the 4-part series now into a kind of just a 1-hour seamless 1-hour film, and we're going to be screening it at the Tribeca Film Center in New York City on April 2nd. That's going to be great fun. It's an invitation-only event, but I think there may be some people in this room who we need to slip into that meeting if you'd like to go. So get a hold of Paul and get a hold of me, because we do have some space left. It's a small space, about 70 people it holds. Then there'll be a nice little reception afterwards. That's part of the Rivendell Center project that I'm doing in New York. But do we have time for any questions, Paul? Okay, so we have time for questions, guys. Any questions at all about the film, about Benjamin Rush, anything? Yeah, right here.
Yeah, I'm actually reading right now the book The Quartet by Joseph Ellis, which talks about, centers on the four men that were the impetus to transition us from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution. And Benjamin Rush, I know, was a strong proponent of that, of a more together federal government. And the colonies, the individual colonies and states were concerned about the fact that having just gotten out from under tyrant, they didn't want that to repeat.
Yes.
And it sets out, I mean, I see all the reasons that you needed to transition from the Articles of Confederation, but I'm wondering, given where we are today, with a leader who seems to think the Constitution doesn't apply to him, how do you think that Benjamin Rush might have, if he could see what was going on, responded to that and tried to address those problems?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that question. I mean, no matter who's in the White House, pushing the limits of executive power has been a challenge for us, hasn't it, over decades, many decades, different administrations. The founders were so clear-eyed about the tendency for executive power to want to expand its executive power, right? This is what the huge fears were. This is what the debates in the Federalist Papers were all about. And what Rush says in his own arguments there on the floor of the Pennsylvania State House, arguing for the adoption. He wants unconditional adoption of the Constitution. And a couple of big arguments he makes are separation of powers and representation. And it seems to me this is key. His separation of powers is key. I once said this was part of a group talking to the great Justice Antonin Scalia. And they asked Scalia, how do you explain the success, the relative success of the American experiment? And he gave the three-word answer, separation of powers. So when those other branches are doing their constitutional duty, it helps to restrain, whether it's the chief executive or the Supreme Court or the legislative body. So it seems to me that they anticipated, the founders absolutely anticipated a moment where a chief executive would be pushing the boundaries of the Constitution. I don't think they would have necessarily anticipated, though, the way in which, for example, different federal agencies that people who man them, who are not elected by the people, could exert such amazing power upon all of us. I don't think they anticipated that, and that's a huge problem, and there are ways to push on that, back on that we can talk about, but thank you for that question. Another question right here.
I wonder if you could comment on some of the men that may have influenced Benjamin Rush. I'm wondering, like in his faith, where he's influenced by Whitfield, who was preaching in Philadelphia. Yeah. Or maybe did he have any interaction with Wilberforce about slavery? Who influenced him?
Great question. You know, on the faith question, he's got connections there. While he was a student, he spent some time in Princeton. So the Reverend Witherspoon, John Witherspoon, Presbyterian minister, evangelical minister, president of the College of New Jersey, now Princeton, for 25 years. Madison studied under Witherspoon as well, as you probably know. And he went to a service, a church service. Witherspoon is preaching, and there's a young lady there with him, the daughter of a family he's very friendly with, Julia Stockton. And after the service, Julia Stockton comments on the brilliance of Reverend Witherspoon's sermon. She's 16 years old. And Benjamin Rush decides right on the spot, that's the woman I gotta marry. And he does. And she's an incredible help to him. I have not gotten my hands on her own personal journal, but apparently it's a deeply religious work. She herself is a very committed Christian. So on the religious end, there are different influences. But in terms of the politics, I think John Adams has got to be the most important political influence on his life. They developed a very close friendship. And when I say John Adams, Abigail is also part of that mix. Absolutely. In fact, I think I've got it with me. Maybe if I can find it real quickly. Rush would write these wonderful character sketches about the different founding generations, people that he met. And most of them are very positive. Sometimes he'll have some little snide remarks, in there. But I think the longest one is on Adams. Let me see if I can find it quickly here. Where was he up there? Yeah, here he is. Yeah, he's praising John Adams for being such a Republican, ready to go to the depths of the earth to defend America's Republican principles. But he also has this comment, the pleasure of many evenings talking with him. The pleasure of these evenings was much enhanced by the society of Mrs. Adams, who in point of talent, knowledge, virtue, and female accomplishments was in every respect fitted to be the friend and companion of her husband in all of his different and successive stations of private citizens, member of Congress, foreign minister, vice president, etc. So he had this wonderful relationship with the Adams, and I think politically probably had the most impact on him. I love these character sketches. He has one about himself, and it's a one-line description of himself, and it just says, under Benjamin Rush, he aimed well. He aimed well. There it is. So there was a humility to him there, but of course he is in the throes. I'm just fascinated by this physician who feels like it's still his role to get involved in all these other questions. And as I suggested here, the golden rule is a thing that drives him. Treat other people as you want to be treated. That comes out of his deep Christian conviction. So applied to politics, applied to slavery, applied to medicine, applied to education. He just keeps applying the principle in these different sectors in life. Just absolutely fascinating founder. Yeah, over there.
Of all the things he was involved with, mental health, medical education, all the things he ended up establishing, can you speak to how he ended up becoming the treasurer of the U.S. Mint?
I'm a little foggy on those details, to be honest. I want to ask you, what prompted that question?
My daughter was a history major, and I told her I was coming to hear you speak today, and she
Yes.
said, please ask him.
Why can't we get you yes/no questions? I do remember reading about that. At least let me see if I'm getting it right. So your daughter may have to correct me, okay, when you get back. He didn't really want the position initially. And I can't remember if it was the vice president or the president at the time. They needed somebody they could just trust who would be seen as kind of a nonpartisan. Somebody got a partial answer to that question? Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to kind of ask if this is applicable. Would it have had anything to do with his relationship with Robert Morris, who himself was very involved in the finances of the Young Republic?
That could be right. You know, honestly, I don't know. I don't have a full answer for you on that question. But I do think the issue, as I remember reading about this, the issue of we need a person who's going to be kind of above suspicion, above reproach, a man whose integrity we can trust. And here he is, this Philadelphia physician who's interacting with many people. He's made some enemies, no question about it, because of different views about how to treat the sick, whether it's the yellow fever or other things. He's made some enemies in Philadelphia. But in terms of his integrity, that really is a pretty unquestioned thing.
Some of the other founders came out of the revolution broke.
Yeah.
I mean, it was very hard for them to have their estates. And
Yes.
Jefferson, Washington, they all sold property
Yes.
after their deaths to pay their debts. Is that one of the reasons? Was he independently of means?
Yeah.
As a physician?
Yeah.
They trusted him because he handled his own.
Well, definitely, there was some financial benefit to him when he married Julia Stockton. She came from a wealthy family, but he's a physician in Philadelphia. The low point was the yellow fever outbreak. People fleeing the city, and he is pretty close to destitute himself then because he's just treating people without charging them to keep keep people from perishing. But once you get through the yellow fever epidemic and the city gets back on its feet, then economically he's up and running. Of course, he's a major player at the Pennsylvania Hospital, and he has a real prestige there. So yeah, he's independently making his own living that way, not dependent on slavery. You know, this guy. Yeah.
The culture that gave birth to the Declaration is epitomized by Benjamin Rush's Christianity. In Congress, there's a bill to make permanent ban on Muslim immigration from certain countries. Yesterday, we had a demonstration at Gracie Mansion.
Yeah.
What's your comment on the role of Islam and whether it conflicts with the American heritage?
Well, it's a huge question. I don't know how much time we've got. Well, I'll take a quick stab at it. I have read the Quran and I have read the Hadith a number of years ago now, studied those in school. and certainly have interacted with what we call moderate Muslims who live in America who love the American experiment. They're here. I know some of them. The challenge, it seems, with Islam is that when you read the Quran, it's kind of reads like the book of Proverbs, but not as wise in my mind. But the amazing thing about the Bible, Old Testament and New, if you think about it, whether you're a person of faith or not, there's a narrative arc to the Bible. And the narrative arc is freedom, isn't it, people? The Jews in slavery, freed from their bondage from Pharaoh, brought into the promised land as landowners. Slavery to freedom. The New Testament, God's children, freed from the slavery of sin and the fear of death. It's a freedom book. It's a freedom book. You couldn't say that about the Quran. It's much easier from the Quran to take passages out of context, quote unquote, because it's not clear what the context is, right? But in the scriptures, Old and New Testament, it's pretty clear what the contexts are if you're a serious scholar. You can figure things out. Much tougher with the Quran. You don't have an overarching narrative. So it's been much more difficult for Islam to make its peace with liberal democracy. And it's a great question. Think about what's going on right now in the war here against Iran. If the Iranians had adopted something like a liberal democratic regime in 1979, what a different world this would be. I mean, here we are. Here is Islam now, 250 years after the American Revolution, with liberal democracy and the amazing success that this kind of government can produce, the level of prosperity, entrepreneurship, human flourishing. We're all witnesses of it. And here you have much of the Islamic world can't make its peace with it. That seems to me like a theological problem, not an intellectual problem, only a theological problem. So it's a challenge. That's a big one-winded answer. Yeah, over here.
Was Rush Limbaugh named after Benjamin Rush?
I have absolutely no idea. What a great question.
Maybe one more question.
We got time for one more, I think. This side of the room? Yes, sir.
Just a couple of comments. I believe, so you made a great case for Benjamin Rush as a principal founder and father of American medicine. As a physician myself, I marvel that I think in David McCullough's book he has him go up and do breast surgery on John Adams' daughter, which in the 1700s was quite pioneering good work.
Wow.
But there was also a mention of maybe you wouldn't treat yellow fever by letting blood and giving a purgative known as a thunderbolt,
Right.
which he was famous for.
Yes.
We've come a long way in medicine.
Yes.
That's what they did in those days.
Yes.
And I think Meriwether Lewis was said to learn from Rush, as he would be the de facto physician of the Lewis Spark.
That's right. That's right. Rush gave them advice. Yeah.
Just a few comments.
No, thank you for that. It's a great point. It's another example of how, in some ways, he's such a pioneer. He's such an innovator. He's a visionary, particularly on the mentally ill. It was wonderful going into the Pennsylvania hospital, and it's kind of preserved. That space that goes back 200 plus years, that space is preserved. The operating chamber was preserved. He's such a pioneer. But then you've got these cultural assumptions that are hard to shake, hard to shake. And when it seems to work, when the remedy of bloodletting seems to work in certain cases, well, what do you do with that, right? So, but I have to say this about Rush. The way in which he embodies this alliance between deep religious conviction and democratic freedom, human freedom and human dignity, that is a truth that, of course, is so important to what's happening here at Grove City College and the people in this room. And yet that basic truth, from what I've seen of the Ken Burns film, is missing. And that to me is kind of astonishing. How do you do a 12-hour documentary about the American Revolution and not understand that at the end of the day, what holds this revolution together is that bond between religious conviction and democratic ideals? The honest historian has to see it. And to not see it is like going into Italy, going into the Chianti region, spending a week there, coming back and saying, you never had a glass of wine. You didn't see any wineries. I mean, come on, man. So, thank you all for the time together. It's been great being with you.
That was fantastic. Thanks so much. Yeah, the Ken Burns series, and he's obsessed with race, right? But the founders put in place a system to end slavery, right? And why wouldn't you talk about somebody like Benjamin Rush? And I love Joe's line that from Rush, nothing but the act of the first drama is finished. Really, the second big act was the Civil War, right? With Lincoln here in Pennsylvania, Gettysburg said 7 years ago, our founding fathers put forth the proposition that all men are created equal, right? Endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. So at that point, he's fulfilling the vision, right, of the founders and people like Benjamin Rush. I had no idea he was only 30 years old. I mean, he was younger than Jefferson at that point. Sorry, I have so many comments here, but I'll try. But I looked at Wikipedia while I was sitting there. There's no mention of him being an abolitionist in the first paragraph, in the opening paragraph, and it says something about revolutionary and the U.S. Mint. That's what it says in the 2 lines, but nothing about that at all. John Jay has been called America's Wilberforce. Argument could be made that he was. I did a book on the church and slavery. St. Peter Claver is on the front, and he called himself the slave to the slaves, right? But this guy sounds every bit as significant and brilliant. One last point. I love the material on the bedside manners, patient attitudes. I mean, when I worked for the transplant team at Pitt, I could tell the patients who were going to make it from the ones who weren't. At times, often by attitude, right? If they had the look of fear of death in their eyes, it might not matter what their bilirubin is and anything else, right? So attitude was so fundamental. And the bloodletting, very interesting. George Washington died of basically a bloodletting. So Washington I talked to Brian Hilton at Mount Vernon about this, and Brian had been pre-med at Yale, and he said that Washington died from basically a version of strep throat. 1799, which today, Dan would be like a slam dunk, right? Give an antibiotic to it and that be it. But he got to a certain crisis point and the doctor said, we know what we have to do now. He needs a good bloodletting. It's like, no, right? Don't do that, right? So he died. I think he was maybe 67 years old. Too bad Benjamin Rush couldn't have been there to stop him. Anyway, that was fantastic. Thank you. How can people follow you, get on your email list? I know the Rivendell list.
Yes, if you want to go to Rivendell, Rivendell Center, NYC.org.
Okay.
Rivendell Center, NYC.org.
Okay, yeah, Rivendell Center.
Sign up and get you on the list and all the rest.
And it's mentioned here in his bio, inside. All right, take this with you. A few upcoming events. Tonight, if anybody's around in Grove City, we have Dr. Ann Bradley of George Mason University. Yeah, she's going to be speaking on a Christian case for economic freedom at Rathburn at 7 o'clock. And if you know anybody up there who wants to come in and join us, let us know. March 26th, we have our next lecture in the Conservative Mind series. So the Conservative Mind series, named after the book by Russell Kirk, The Conservative Mind, that we've had Jonah Goldberg, Rusty Reno of First Things, Brad Berzer of Hillsdale. We have Michael Knowles coming in next, so March 26th. And if some of you don't know who he is, your kids and grandchildren all know who he is, but believe me. April 16th, Institute for Faith and Freedom Annual Conference, America at 250, what 1776 was all about. Our keynote that night is going to be from Matthew Spalding, who used to work with at the Heritage Foundation, now runs the Hillsdale Center in D.C., speaking on the making of the Declaration of Independence. The next one of these on June 9th, Selena Zito, right, local gal, who wrote the book on Butler. She was there in Butler ducking when the bullets were flying. And Donald Trump called her like 12 times over the next 24 hours. I mean, Trump has this kind of, she has almost like a motherly relationship with Trump. It's very interesting. So she wrote this fascinating book about it. By the way, she notes in the book that George Washington was shot and, miraculous survival in Butler County. I didn't know that. What today would be considered Butler County. And she's making a film about it too, with Scott Sanders. Scott here? Scott's a local filmmaker. That'll be out next September. September 8th, 2026, Dr. Jason Edwards on the Wild West, which would be a really cool topic, I think. And then December 8th, David Porter, Judge David Porter, one of our trustees, on the role of the Declaration of Independence in constitutional interpretation. All right, very good. And final reminder, too, if you're interested in this matching gift, there's information in here for our Center for Faith and Public Life. Bring this with you. All right, thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. Take care. Good to see you.